So my name's Katie Aston and I work in the crime policing and fire group at the Home Office, but I'm on the crime and safeguarding side of the business. So we're like the sort of social policy bit of the Home Office. We do things like drugs, alcohol, CSE, modern slavery, violence against women and girls, that sort of thing. So, and we have a different minister as well. Our minister is Sarah Newton. So that's who I am. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the strategy, how it came about, what we plan to do with it. Because as Lauren said, when we launched it over a year ago, we sent it out to all chief constables, assuming A, that they would read it, and B, that they would disseminate it. And I don't think either of those things happened. So we're sort of trying to relaunch it to the police audience over the next few months. But obviously, over the last year, lots of things have changed and new things are happening. And that's really what we want to talk to you about today. And one of the things that we've been asked to look at, my bit of the Home Office, is how can we make a systemic shift from enforcement to prevention for well-rehearsed reasons, which I think we discussed at length yesterday. Can I also ask, was everybody at the Minister's speech yesterday? Yeah. So actually he sort of stole my thunder a bit. So my presentation was a lot of the stuff that he talked about the changing crime mix and how we get our stats and all that sort of thing. So I'll go through the presentation, but probably not in the same detail that I would do normally, because I think a lot of it was already discussed yesterday. And probably I think our time together is probably going to be spent more fruitfully looking forward. So, okay, cool. So the modern crime prevention strategy came about for two reasons, really. It was introduced by the previous Home Secretary, and she had two interests. One was in the noughties for everybody who was around then. Everybody was expecting crime to go up when austerity hit, and it didn't go up in the same way that we thought it would do. And she was interested in interrogating the data, thinking about why what happened, and why what we thought was going to happen didn't happen, and just to understand, what was driving what and how we were where we were. And the second reason was very specific. Does everybody here remember the big peak we had in metal theft? So it went zooming up, and then we introduced some regulations and legislation, and it went down very, very quickly. And she was quite interested in that as a case study, and said, look, if you can have that effect so radically and so effectively on one crime type, can't we look at doing that same sort of thing across the piece with all crimes? So that's where it came about. Published just over a year ago, describes what we call what we think of as the drivers of crime. And I think it's fair to say if you asked 100 criminologists what they think drives crime, you'll probably get 100 different answers. So this probably isn't the only presentation you've seen of this ilk, but it's our assessment of what we think drives most crimes based on the evidence that we have. So, where are we? Crime has fallen. So this was very much what we were talking about yesterday. Crime has fallen. I think probably in the last 4 to 5 months things have changed a little bit. Some of the old traditional crimes seem to be on the increase again a bit, which we talked about yesterday. And also there is a worrying real increase in violent crime. And particularly knife crime, firearms and homicides are sort of big concerns at the moment. And we're sort of looking at what we can do to try and de-accelerate the increase in these crimes. And there are also some regional specifics, like I live in central London, acid attacks, moped crimes, those sorts of things. So I'm sure it'll be different right across the country, but there does seem to be a genuine increase. So, yeah. Go over. So going back to the traditional crimes, the ones that have risen, I suppose it's kind of just sort of worth pausing for a minute and remind ourselves that, going through this exercise, we do know quite a lot about how crime prevention works. And I'm not just talking about leaflets about closing windows and things like that, but we know that a lot of the decline of large-scale acquisitive crime has been because there's been a decline in heroin use, for example. So I think where we're seeing these old traditional crimes coming back up again, it's sort of worth revisiting some of the learning and not forgetting that we do know this stuff. Then the sort of next slide is about how crime is changing. So some of that, we think is the figures are going up because there's been previously been underreporting, particularly around what we call hidden crime types, which I think is a term you use as well. And more people are presenting to the police or to reporting authorities, so it looks as though there's an increase. And also there's new crime types coming online, particularly fraud and cyber, which are really the new volume crimes of this century, whereas burglary and car theft and so on was probably in the 90s and the noughties. And as I've said, there are some indications that there are real rises in violent crime. So the framework that we've set out identifies 6 what we call main drivers of crime, and they are in no particular order. Drugs and alcohol, which I don't think you'll hear many people disagree with. And the reason we separate them out is because drugs is a driver of acquisitive crime, whereas alcohol is mainly violent crime, so that's why we've done them separately. Opportunity, if you leave your window open, somebody can get through it. If you don't change your password regularly, you will get hacked into you will become a victim of fraud or cybercrime quite likely. So making sure that we design out crime, that the opportunities for people to commit crime are reduced and hopefully eradicated. Profit, obviously people aren't going to get involved in crime if there isn't some benefit to them. And I think probably modern slavery is a really good example of that, where, you know, the huge growth in the organised criminal networks has been largely because there has been so much money to be made out of, you know, the problem. The next 2 are the ones that people tend to have queries about most, I suppose. I work mainly with the voluntary sector, so policing audiences are not the people I'm normally presenting this to, but effectiveness of the criminal justice system. Normally when I go out and talk to people, they think that you're just talking about prisons and probations and the courts. They don't think about the police, and I think there's a sort of real opportunity to have a discussion there about, you know, public interface and how the public and support the police, work alongside the police, interact with the police and so on and so forth. And the last one, and I always leave it to last because it's always the one that people have the most issues with, is character. And I think actually the voluntary sector really hates the word character, and actually oddly enough the audience this morning weren't that mad about it, were they? But I think people just feel it's very judgmental. It's about good character, bad character, you know, whereas what it's really trying to get at is saying, well, if you've got a whole community of youngsters who are living in the same sink estate, how come some of them get involved in offending and others don't, and what's the difference between the 2 of them? That's really what it's trying to get at. With the voluntary sector now, I talk about resilience and things like that, rather than using the term character, which seems to be more acceptable. What were the terms they were using this morning, Lauren? People talked about for young people and prevention. I can't remember. Anyway, we've written it down. But it's really about, you know, I think for me, having been involved in this sort of world of social policy for donkey's years, you know, in the last 10 years, there's been a huge increase in our understanding and our knowledge of the brain and neuroscience that certainly wasn't around when I first started going to work doing this sort of stuff. So by the fact that we can understand the brain better and we can understand how it develops, there are actually more opportunities for us to intervene to develop the traits that protect people from becoming involved in crime, so things like empathy, resilience, etc., etc. And I've organised some seminars recently with some neuroscientist academics, and they all talk very much about the brain. This maybe is all familiar to you, but they talk very much about the brain as like being a regular muscle, and that you can go into the gym and exercise it and make it stronger and make it perform better in certain ways. So it's really trying to apply those techniques to the brain. And I understand you're all very involved in ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences, yeah. So it's that sort of territory, but I think we're all talking about the same stuff but using slightly different language and talking about it in a slightly different way.
I think one of the points to draw out from this morning, which people might want to think about and discuss again later, is some of the issues around police officers and police representatives using some of this terminology and perhaps needing that greater awareness of what it means to be able to talk about it with confidence and not get themselves tied up in knots in relation to being misinterpreted and potentially misrepresented. So there's quite a lot of education to do in that area.
Yeah, I think that's right, and developing a common narrative that everybody can sort of buy into, and I think that's a challenge for us to take away with us. So the next slide is sort of some of the key things that we're doing at the moment around the 6 drivers of crime. The focus is very much on opportunity, particularly around violent crime, trying to sort of reduce the number of opportunities that people have to buy knives, for example, carry acid without any retribution, and so on and so forth. Next slide. And then this is really sort of where we're going in the future. So the strategy, it sort of has some key themes that go through it. One is about partnership and how we work together with the private sector, the voluntary sector and the statutory sector. And another theme is technology, not just about technology that enables new crime types, but how we can use technology to identify and reduce crime. So one of the pieces of work that Lauren and I have been involved in, the Dawes Centre at Dawes Centre for Future Crimes at University College London have recently funded a whole new sort of set of proposals, and they're looking at obviously technically enabled crime, but they're also very interested in how we can use technology with high harm crimes. So a couple of examples. This was a real life one. You know, the Alexa technology, those machines that speak to you in your front room that I went on holiday with somebody who had one and it drove me mad. Anyway, but this woman was in an abusive relationship, and her husband came home and he was abusive to her, and he said to her, "You haven't called the sheriff, have you?" And Alexa thought he was instructing the machine to call the sheriff. So the sheriff was called, the sheriff turned up, the perpetrator was nicked, and so on and so forth. So I think sort of there's quite a few questions about use of technology, covert technology in people's private spaces, when a lot of crime types are moving from public spaces into people's homes and sort of less visible places. Another example that they talk about a lot is about you know, my mum's 83, I phone her up, I have her power of attorney, I say I want to do this, that and the other. How does she know it's me? Because impersonation technology is so good nowadays, it could in fact be Lauren, you know, who has decided to impersonate me. So I think there's kind of quite a few challenges there about how we think about these things, and also about how we take society with us and how we take the voluntary sector with us, and get people sort of buying into new ways of doing things. But on the plus side, I suppose it gives us a big opportunity to do things differently. So why this shift to prevention? So obviously there's all the stuff that we've been talking about for the last 2 days around capability, capacity, etc., doing stuff differently. But I think also from the Home Office's point of view, there's a moral imperative to focus much more on the crimes that do the most harm, the high harm crimes, and also that possibly previously we haven't been very systematic in applying learning across the piece from what we do know about what reduces and prevents crimes. So I was around in the noughties doing quite a lot of this crime prevention work when there was masses of money and we were giving huge grants to Age UK and all that sort of thing. And then when austerity kicked in, I have to say it did sort of feel like we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater a bit. I don't know if you all felt that, and I do sort of think some of this stuff is just going back to what we sort of already knew and trying to sort of build in some sort of infrastructure that enables people to work in a slightly different way. So, yeah. So the things we're looking at, so we have a piece of work, it is called A Shift to Prevention. It's a banner for a range of different initiatives, and we're looking at a range of different work streams that will eventually go to the Home Office board, and they will make whatever decision they make. So really the invitation is to invite you to be part of this conversation and to share with us what you think and where there are gaps and where we could be doing things differently, have we missed some tricks. So the work streams are, some of them are very technical, things like use of data analytics and predictive policing. Then there's sort of more my side of the business, which is how do you involve citizens, communities and the business community in preventing crime? How do you affect more effective partnerships, particularly I think with health, which seems to be a consistent theme and problem? How do you work with industry to build incentives, motivation for them to, you know, include in their designs and thinking how you can reduce crime types? So it's a range of different initiatives. And the timeline, as I say, we've only just really started going out talking to people about this stuff. And so, as a, you know, it's a genuine invitation to hear what you think, but also what can we do at the Home Office to enable you as police leaders to sort of be part of this activity and support you to be able to do what you do around crime prevention more effectively. So these are the next steps, these are the questions really, and this is really when we open up to talk to you.